Welcome to another episode of Indus Magnet, where we delve into Indian history to bring stories and events that have shaped India. Today, we're going to talk about the Third Carnatic Wars and see how it clearly established the British as the dominant force and rulers of India. The Carnatic Wars were not fought in one day. In fact, it's a series of battles fought mostly in Carnatic region of India and was literally the battle for dominance over India fought by two European countries, that is the French and the British, with Britain clearly emerging as the winner. Battle of Wandiwash in 1760 was the final nail in the coffin for French interests in the south as well as the rest of India. The Carnatic is the region in southern India that lies between the discontinuous range of mountains along the India's eastern coast, better known as Eastern Ghats, and the Bay of Bengal, which lies in the erstwhile Madras Presidency, which is today's Indian states of Tamil Nadu and coastal region of Andhra Pradesh. The wars fought in this region between 1746 to 1763 are collectively called as Carnatic Wars, and the battles in this region between French and British India forces between 1756 to 1763 is called as the Third Carnatic Wars. To understand more about the Third Carnatic Wars, let's understand the Indian political system at that time. Mid-18th century was an interesting phase in Indian history, as the great Mughal Empire was in the state of steady decline. At its peak, the Mughal Empire stretched from northern Afghanistan in the north to Assam and Bangladesh in the east, as well as Deccan Plateau comprising of today's Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana and Tamil Nadu region in the south. After over 2 centuries of ruling India, the Mughals were now in a state of terminal decline. After demise of the last major king, Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire lost its control over large areas of India. Mughal-controlled territories and local rulers started seeking out their own independence and control. The collapse of Mughal administration led to instability in the region, leading to series of battles between local kings for control over territory and revenues. These small kingdoms were mostly cash-strapped and were earlier dependent on Mughal structure for revenue collection and authority. This also led to battle for succession within each kingdom. This chaos enabled British and the French to gain inroads in this region and help the rulers with beneficial trade terms, military assistance, or more importantly, helping rulers maintain their succession line. With Mughals out of the equation, Britain and France could now openly engage with local rulers directly. While the Carnatic Wars involved Indian kings and Nawabs, it was essentially a war between Britain and France, who were looking to establish their dominance and control and colonize the region for their own benefit. Britain were early entrants to India and had established British East India Company in 1612. They had fought and won against other powerful European countries, namely the Dutch and the Portuguese, who had well-established trading enterprises in India at that time. French, on the other hand, were late entrants to India. They established themselves in India by 1719, by when Dutch and Portuguese interests in India had dwindled considerably. The French, just like Britain, were represented by their trading arm, the French East India Company. The active involvement of France and Britain in old Mughal territories led to formation of 2 camps of Indian rulers and Nawabs, one assisted by French and the other by British. France was led by their Governor-General Joseph-Francois Dupleix, who took deep interest in local politics and actively engaged in matters of local kings, thereby gaining influence and trading rights from them. The French set up their trading center in nearby Pondicherry in 1674, which went on to becoming their chief settlement in India till the very end. The British, on the other hand, were led by a young ambitious officer called Robert Clive, who later went on to becoming the first Governor-General of Bengal Presidency and is considered instrumental in laying the foundation of British rule in India. British founded Fort St. George in 1639, located in coastal city of Madras, or Chennai as it is called today. This provided strong impetus for future settlements and trading opportunities. In the First Carnatic War from 1746 to 1748, French tried to capture Fort St. David. Fort St. David was a British fort in Cuddalore, south of today's Chennai. British put up strong resistance, and the French were forced to retreat. The Second Carnatic War from 1746 to 48 witnessed the now famous Siege of Arcot. The British won the Second Carnatic War decisively, paving way for British rule of India. The French had lost not just the two wars, but had in turn lost much of its colonial ambitions in India. However, despite the losses, the French continued to interfere in local politics, which set the scene for the Third Carnatic War. The Third Carnatic War took place from 1756 to 63 and coincided with the 7-year wars being fought in Europe. This was a series of wars being fought between Britain and France across their territories in Europe, North and South America, Africa, and India. The Third Carnatic War can be split into 3 battles: Chandan or Chandranagore Conflict in Bengal region, Siege of Madras, and finally the Battle for Wandiwash in the Carnatic region of India. Let us go through each one of them. Chandranagar or Chandranagore, as it was called back then, is situated on the Hooghly River about 50 km upstream of Kolkata. Chandranagar was one of the most important French settlements in 18th century. At its peak, the city was far bigger and considered strategically more important than Kolkata. The French fort at Chandranagar was called Fort Orleans. A lot had changed within India since the Second Carnatic Wars. British were clearly the dominant power and were now openly challenging the last remnants of Mughal vestige, especially in their one stronghold region of Bengal. British East India Company, led by Robert Clive, was now openly challenging the Nawab of Bengal, who was aided by the French. They were headed towards a major war, and both sides led mini-campaigns to consolidate their position and gain momentum. One such campaign was the Battle of Chandranagar. British found French support of Nawab of Bengal as a major irritant, and Robert Clive, who owed his career to defeating French in Siege of Arcot during Second Carnatic War, decided to end the threat of French intervention in India for the last time by attacking the last remaining French territory in the region, Chandranagar. In 1756, Colonel Robert Clive and Admiral Charles Watson of the British Navy bombarded Chandanagar with his 3 warships, HMS Kent, HMS Tiger, and HMS Salisbury. French couldn't afford to lose this important base and were well prepared to defend. The French had set up defenses on the road leading to the fort and had also sunk several ships in the river channel to prevent passage of warships. In order to take Fort Orleans, HMS Kent and Tiger managed to edge up to the fort to start their bombardment and were able to inflict heavy damage. French, in response, had 16 guns at their disposal and used all of them on the oncoming ships and troops. The ships took a lot of damage and also led to killing of British soldiers. However, Admiral Watson was able to enforce a complete naval blockade of the fort. With this blockade and limited supplies within the fort, along with low morale, on 24th March 1756, the French troops surrendered. The French troops who managed to escape took shelter with Nawab of Bengal, which eventually led to the epic Battle of Plassey, which is a separate topic on its own. As for Chandranagar, the town's fortifications and many houses were demolished thereafter, and its importance as a commercial center was completely eclipsed by that of Calcutta just downriver. With the capitulation of Chandranagar, scene of Third Carnatic War shifted back to south and straight to Fort St. George in Madras. With Bengal out of French hands, Carnatic was the only region where it had some remaining influence. With 7-year war being waged across the globe, both sides sent in fresh reinforcements and effected change in their leadership. Interestingly, both sides ended with two Irishmen leading the charge. Arthur de Lally was appointed as the Governor General of French India. British appointed Colonel Eyre Coote to command British forces in India. French reinforcements led by Arthur de Lally arrived in Pondicherry in 1758 and almost immediately mounted several successful attacks on British posts in Carnatic region. De Lally immediately found success when he attacked Fort St. David in Cuddalore and successfully overthrew the British forces from the fort. The fort itself was reduced to rubble. They had succeeded in capturing Fort St. David, which they had failed to do so earlier. This was a major win, and the French were now aiming to take over Fort St. George from British. The stage was now set for showdown at Madras. Fort St. George was the most important British garrison in southern India and had been a target of previous attacks by France. Loss of Fort St. George would not only have revived the fortunes of France in India, but would have also severely dented British trading from this region, and therefore the stakes were high. British were alarmed at the loss of Fort St. David and immediately sent in reinforcements to the region and around the fort. Madras in 1758 was divided by British into two parts, one called the Black Town, where the local population lived, and one was Fort St. George or the White Town, which housed the Europeans. In December of 1758, French forces attacked the Black Town. Being undefended, the well-equipped French forces were able to easily enter the town and loot the houses. British countered with a sortie of their own, led by Colonel Draper. This led to a bloody street fight, which left over 300 dead on both sides. French attack was well planned, and Draper and his men were forced to escape into Fort St. George. The French had hoped to draw the British forces out and earn a quick win, just like in Fort St. David. With British forces escaping back into the fort, the French hopes of a quick win were dashed, and they were now looking at a lengthy siege to decide the winner. Governor de Lally immediately closed all escape routes from the fort. With the fort effectively under siege, French started heavy bombardment in January of 1759, which went on for over 5 days. However, despite the heavy 5-day bombardment, British defences remained intact. This was highly frustrating for de Lally. He knew he only had little time before British reinforcement started coming in. He had heard of reports of British Navy under Admiral Pocock leaving from Kolkata with additional troops and supplies, and he ordered a full-on attack before they could come. With the full-on attack, French finally succeeded in creating a breach, and victory seemed closer. De Lally was counting on French Navy to block the advancing British warships. However, French Navy was nowhere to be seen, and British Navy got an unhindered passage to the fort. This strategic mistake shifted the battle scales immediately. On February 16, 1759, a British naval squadron arrived in Madras. De Lally knew that the siege could no longer continue, and on February 17th, de Lally ordered a full retreat, ending the 67-day siege of Madras. This was seen as a critical morale-boosting victory for Britain during the global 7-year war. As for French, it was one more defeat in the series of reversals they were facing in India. The war now moved to Wandiwash. It was strategically located equidistant from Chennai and Pondicherry, and very close to the major supply depot of British in Kanchipuram, as well as to Fort Arcot, which was the scene of a major fight in the Second Carnatic War. Just like in Bengal, British were now committed to defeating French in Carnatic as well. British saw that French had some minimal presence in Wandiwash and decided to raid it. The small French force surrendered immediately. However, French Governor General de Lally was not someone to accept defeat and decided to send in a relief force to take over Wandiwash. De Lally scored initial win by successfully attacking British supply depot in nearby Conjeeveram. This meant critical supplies would take a lot longer. De Lally believed this would help him win Wandiwash, and he quickly stormed the Wandiwash fort. He was hoping for a decisive win at Wandiwash to turn over the tide of defeats French has been facing. This led to the final act of the Third Carnatic Wars and the final showdown between the two forces. This last battle is called as the Battle of Wandiwash in 1760. On hearing of storming of Wandiwash, Eyre Coote led his army to the battle to regain Wandiwash fort. Both sides were evenly matched, and unlike the previous battles, this was a straight fight between the two forces. French, while well equipped, were suffering from low morale due to previous defeats, as well as desertions. On 21st Jan 1760, battle lines were drawn. The French arranged their 3 battalions in straight line, covering the 2 flanks and center. Coote strategically placed his 3 regiments in 3 separate lines to ensure covering both flanks, but also offering extra flexibility in moving his troops around. The French engaged the British forces and made some early inroads. The French cavalry was able to repel the British troops initially. Despite making some early inroads, the British again were able to hold their own. French found themselves in familiar distressing situation. Despite early wins, the British, just like in Chandranagar and in Siege of Madras, were able to hold their lines and defend. The French troops realized this one also was not going to be a quick win like they had hoped. As luck would have it, a chance shot by English gun hit an ammunition cart, causing a lot of damage and killing a lot of French troops. This incident, along with low morale, led to panic and string of desertions on French side. French regiments were quickly dissolved, with men running away from their battlefield. Smelling victory, Eyre Coote pressed hard on this advantage and sent in additional troops. They easily overran French positions. French positions were in disarray. French gunners ran away and soldiers abandoned their positions. With French flanks having all but collapsed, British could now concentrate on the center. This added pressure led to a lot of surrenders. With defeat clearly on the horizon, it is said that de Lally himself took charge of the French regiment to ensure orderly fallback and reduce the casualties as much as possible. This was required to have any hope of future offensive action. This was not to be. The French forces had once again been comprehensively defeated. French lost between 600 to 800 men, either killed or wounded, and even lost their second in command. Arthur de Lally held out in Pondicherry in the hope of seeing reinforcements from France or hearing news of a peace settlement. With neither of the two in sight, de Lally surrendered on Jan 15, 1761. Governor-General de Lally was taken captive. The French, looking for a scapegoat, charged de Lally with treason, and in 1766, King Louis of France condemned him to death, and he was beheaded like a common criminal. His British counterpart, Eyre Coote, served with a lot of success. He was knighted in 1771 and went on to becoming the Lieutenant Governor of British India. The collapse of French position in India was one of the events that compelled France to sign the Treaty of Paris, reducing the French to little more than traders in India and effectively ending further French imperial ambitions in India. This decisive victory for Britain in Wandiwash led to the rise of Britain as the dominant power of India. The Third Carnatic Wars ensured there was no other European challenge to rise of Britain. The path was now clear for British Raj to be established.